Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this presentation. My name is Mkhuma. I'm one of the lecturers, secondary lecturer for the module ETH306W, which is Inclusive Education Themes B. We have Dr. Mbelu, who is your primary lecturer, and we want to remind you that Dr. Mkitswe is no more a lecturer in this module, and therefore we discourage you from writing her emails or sending her messages. If you have any query, please send a message to Dr. S. Mbelu or to me directly. We will attend to your email. But before we start, I would like us to think about this code that reads thus: we must pursue knowledge and wisdom above all other things. What we'll get today or in this module should assist us in becoming wiser in how we handle issues at schools as teachers. I have already mentioned that as from this year, Dr. Mbelu is your primary lecturer and I am your secondary lecturer. The purpose of this presentation is just to give you an overview of the module and also to say one or two things about preparing for June-July examination. First of all, you have to check that you have the right official study material, which is available on My UNISA for all students, and it includes the study guide, tutorial letter 001 and tutorial letter 101. Plus tutorial letter 102. Please check all the announcements on My UNISA. They will guide you about the submission dates. They will guide you also about the unique student numbers, which appears to be a problem to most students. The instructions on My UNISA notices are there in terms of which unique student numbers should you use. The demarcation of the study material, please read pages 18 to 19 of your tutorial letter 101. And the appendices, section A, study unit 1 and study unit 2. In section A, you will read about learners who experience barriers to learning. That information is available in your study guide. And in study unit 2, you will read about the definition, the description of who are the learners who experience barriers to learning. That information is available on page 2 to page 17. The causes of barriers to learning and development, read pages 18 to page 34. In Appendix F, you will find information about perceptual motor barriers. Appendix G, language as a barrier to learning. Appendix H, learning problems as a barrier to learning. Appendix I, emotional and behavioral problems as barriers to learning. Appendix J, barriers to learning related to spoken language. Appendix K, barriers to learning related to written language. Appendix L, barriers to learning related to reading. Appendix M, barriers to learning related to mathematics. Appendix N, Education White Paper 6, which is our main document. Appendix O brings this emotional needs model. We don't have anything to add on this when we talk about the scope for the examination. Let me highlight this thing. Some of the students will ask, what is the scope? This is the scope. The demarcation is the scope. We are supposed to set everything that is prescribed for the module. And therefore, what I've just mentioned to you as the demarcation of the module is the scope. You have to understand various barriers that are experienced by our learners. So some of these barriers are related to socio-economic backgrounds, such as poverty and drugs. Some of them are intrinsic, which means they are within the learner and they are related to sensory and genetic factors. Other barriers to learning are directly related to the school environment, such as overcrowded classrooms, underqualified teachers, lazy teachers. I'm not sure if we still have lazy teachers in our schools, but if you read your study guide, it would show you that the element of lazy teachers is one of the barriers that is one of the factors that create barriers for learning. Other barriers are related to parental attitudes and upbringing. So for you as a student in this module, we expect you to have a deep understanding of these various barriers. Now, as a student in this module, Inclusive Education Themes B, you are also expected to have a clearer understanding of what inclusion is about. And then we have tried to put together some notes here just to highlight to you that inclusive education is not really about what people say, but it is about increasing participation of all learners. Please underline all learners. Their participation, whether they are learners with disabilities or not, learners with high intellect or not, but it's about increasing participation in schools or in education of all learners, and also eliminating all factors that can exclude learners from participation in the school curriculum, such as culture, such as communities and local schools. Inclusive education is about restructuring the cultures. How do we do our things in our schools? It's about restructuring our policies. It's about relooking at the practices in our schools. How do we conduct ourselves? How do we develop our lesson plan? How do we teach in our schools? It's about accepting the diversity that our learners bring to school and work from those diverse backgrounds to promote participation of all learners. So as opposed to the special education, inclusive education is not about a specific type of learners, but it is about all learners and how do they participate in the school-related activities. From the definition of inclusive education that we have put together for you, there are also reasons why inclusive education is so popular globally. And in South Africa, we have provided you with 10 reasons. For example, that inclusive education is a human right. It promotes the right of all learners to be at school to learn. It makes a good educational sense. It promotes social justice. It accepts diversity. It promotes respect for one another. So if you look at all these reasons for the adoption of inclusive education, you'll understand that it's not about specific people in our schools or specific learners, but it's about everyone in our school and changing the culture that we used to practice in our schools. In order to promote this participation of all learners, as teachers were expected to identify various barriers that affect the participation of our learners. For examples, there are external barriers which are related to home, to the school, and the community. And these barriers include, amongst other things, the socio-economic backgrounds. You know, currently we have nutrition programs in our schools, and it was because some teachers were able to have an eye that we cannot teach learners who are hungry because it's not their problem. If they are hungry and we focusing on the curriculum, for sure they will sleep earlier when the school starts, and then they will not be able to participate in our school. So inclusive education is about that as teachers we are able to identify everything, whether within the learner or outside the learner. So the socio-economic barriers have affected a wide range of our learners and have resulted into the dropouts. Some learners leave school because of the socio-economic backgrounds. There are issues related to inflexible curriculum. You know, in our schools, there are learners whose only sin is that they cannot read and write. And then it is the prescription of the curriculum. So these are some of the things that we have to question as inclusive education teachers. How how flexible is our curriculum. Language and communication. There are some learners who fail mathematics and physical science only because they cannot articulate English very well. So those are issues that are pertinent to inclusive education that we must consider, identify, and then find ways of addressing them. Some environment in schools are inaccessible for other learners. Learners who are using wheelchairs cannot participate in a school environment where there are no safe platform for them to travel. So that brings us to the issue of disabilities. A wide range of learners, those who cannot see, those who struggle to see, or who are visually impaired. The manner in which the curriculum is presented, does it accommodate the needs of those learners as well? Those are external barriers that are related to the culture and practices of our schools, which we as teachers should be able to identify and address. However, there are also the barriers that are inherent to learners themselves. In that one, we cannot try to change the learners. For example, if a learner is experiencing challenges because she has got visual impairment, that we cannot change. But what we can change as teachers is how we teach those learners. In the next presentation, I will also present different strategies that we have to use in order to support learners who are visually impaired, learners who are using wheelchairs, learners who have epilepsy, and so forth. So ours is not to change the learners, but ours is to find ways, different strategies that we can use in order to teach the learners the way they are. Now, apart from focusing on the learners, we also have the issue of parents. You know, according to South African Schools Act, parents are or must be involved in the education of their children. And then their involvement differ because they also bring some attitudes to the school. And as a teacher, you are the recipient of those attitudes. In your study guide, you will read there is wide range of attitudes that your parents or behavioral patterns that parents of your learners might display. Some parents are articulate, assertive, and educated. Those are the parents who know everything, who may be educated more than you are as a teacher. They know everything, and they have demands from you as a teacher. They expect you to teach their child the way they see fit. Others are academics. They have studied a lot about teaching learners who are visually impaired. So you have to listen to them and accommodate them. Listen to them, but at the end of the day, remember that you are accountable as a teacher in the classroom. It's not that the parent should teach you how to teach, but you should work with those parents, even though they are assertive and educated. Others are knowledgeable. They know their stuff. They know how to teach their children. They know how to support their children, but they are also experiencing other challenges. They are angry. So whenever they talk to you, they will talk bad instead of communicating what they want to communicate. So as a teacher, you still have a responsibility to work with those teachers. Others are angry and not knowledgeable. You know, we have this group that has got knowledge, but they show anger. There is this group that has got anger, but they are not. So they don't know anything. So what they do when they come to the school is just to accuse you of this, blame you for this, blame you of this. But another thing that I want you to understand is that some of these parents are also angry, not because they are angry at you, but they have anger because of the conditions at home, especially the parents who struggle to accept the children or their children who are disabled. So those parents can give you a tough moment, but as a teacher, you have to understand and still work with them. Other parents cannot assist you much because they are submissive. So you call them to a meeting, they will come and listen to you and say, yes, yes, miss, and then they go home. You ask for their opinion, they don't have any opinion. So they are just they are relying on you to guide them. They don't have other other options. There also this group of parents that give teachers a real tough time, those who are angry and uninformed. They know nothing about teaching. They know nothing about the conditions of their child. If their children fail, they will blame you as a teacher. So you still have to work with them. As I said earlier, it is our duty as teachers to be able to identify learners who are experiencing various barriers to learning, whether they are external or they are intrinsic. Now, we have cited some of the examples. We will not cover them there. There are so many in your study guide, but we'll just take you through some of them. For example, for learners with hearing or auditory impairments, for you as a teacher, you can see when they misinterpret, always misinterpreting instructions. You give them this instruction, they tell you something else. So it can be that the learner is not a good listener, or that the learner is experiencing some difficulties in terms of hearing. You will see others, whenever you speak, they turn their head so that they can hear you properly. Others, you will see them watching your lips when you speak, and so forth, and so forth. Now, others, the behavior when they speak, they just speak monotonously. Then you can suspect, we are not speech therapists, but out of this guideline that you've got from the study guide, you can suspect that it's possible that the learner is experiencing some auditory impairment. So for these learners, there is something that you can do. In inclusive education, as I've said earlier, we don't attempt to change the learners, but we attempt to change the culture. We attempt to change our practices as teachers. So those who cannot hear clearly, we use an overhead projector so that they can see what you are talking about to supplement what they are hearing, or some information that could have missed while you were talking. You can assign a peer to take notes using a carbon paper. You can also use visual signals to alert the learner or to drive the learner's attention, or rephrase the questions until the learner can understand what you are trying to say. The last, before giving it to Dr. Mbelu, I'd like to direct your attention to another aspect where our learner struggles, written language. I've said earlier that due to inflexibility of our curriculum, some of our learners don't complete school because they cannot read and write. So writing is a key element that is currently topical when we assess the performance of our learners. Now, the elements of language generally comprise of essay writing, which includes cognitive component, linguistic and stylistic component. There is spelling and handwriting. So what is important for us as teachers is that you are able to understand the manifestation of the difficulties that learners can experience or can display in terms of essay writing, in terms of spelling, in terms of handwriting. I know that you are registered for different phases. So when you prepare for your exam, just focus on your specific phase and say if you can identify the elements that define a learner who experiences barriers to learning in terms of essay, in terms of spelling, in terms of handwriting. Also try in your specific phase to find strategies that can assist a learner who is experiencing challenges in terms of essay writing, in terms of spelling, in terms of handwriting. This is where my presentation ends. I will now hand over to our primary lecturer, Dr. Mbelu, to take you through to the end of this presentation. I wish you all the best, and I hope you will make it. Remember, the fact that you have been included in the ECP program means that you must complete your qualification. So I encourage you to communicate with us, speak to us, make all the preparations and be ready when that day comes. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mkhuma, for for giving us the first part of this presentation. Students, as alluded to in the beginning, there are two parts, but it's just a continuation of the preparation for the exam that is coming. So to say I'm presenting part 2 does not mean that I'm coming with something different. Another thing that I want you to be aware of is the fact that due to time constraints, we couldn't cover everything that is covered in your study guide, in your tutorial letters and all that. So what we have decided to cover here is that which we think is important for now in the time that we've been given. But you as a student, as Dr. Mkhuma said earlier, you are required to look at the demarcation that we gave you. In other words, our so-called scope. In other, what is it that you need to cover in this module? So you do not pick and choose when you prepare for the exam. You read, you study everything. That is very important. All right, to move on with regards to the preparation, Dr. Mkhuma just ended up talking about auditory impairments and how we as teachers can help our students with that. I want to move on and talk about the mathematic problems. This is a huge problem in our schools. It doesn't only affect learners with disabilities, but it affects almost all learners. But as inclusive teachers, we know that we cater for everybody. So you must understand that whatever problem that a normal learner has, most of the time, that kind of a problem will be doubled in a learner with disability. So in other words, you as a teacher, you've got to be very, very conscious as to how you treat learners with disability, even though you do not have to disregard learners that are said to be normal. For instance, let's move to mathematics. Mathematics presents itself with a lot of challenges, not only to learners, but also to our teachers as well. But for instance, there is a problem that a child will be having with mathematics, which is not of his or her own doing, but is the doing of the teacher. It's because of the inadequate instructions that are given to that learner by the teacher. So we are saying, guard against that. When you're dealing with learners with disabilities, make it a point that when you give instructions, the instructions are such that they are differentiated according to a group of learners that you have in your class. Every learner is able to understand the instruction at their own particular level in that particular class. Another thing as a teacher, you mustn't do too much drilling. If you do too much drill work to the learners, it becomes a barrier to their learning, because now drilling means they've got just to assimilate what you're giving them, whereas mathematics requires them to think logically. So too much drilling will not help your learners at all. Forcing learners to employ specific methods. This is another thing that we as teachers can also be guilty of. When because we were taught in a certain way mathematics, we come to class, we want to teach in that particular manner. We want to use the methods that we know. We are not spontaneous in the way that we teach. We are not flexible enough to say in mathematics, there are many ways of killing the cat. In mathematics, there may be different methods that would lead to one correct answer, for instance. So as teachers, we must guard against that. We must not be the causes of the barriers of our learners' learning because of the way we approach things, especially mathematics. You will find more of this as students on page 310 of your study guide. How do mathematics challenges manifest themselves? In other words, how do you see that your child, your learner in this instance, has got a problem with mathematics? One, they cannot sort out objects into categories. They fail to do that. If you say categorize, put these objects into certain groups of maybe likes or some things that are similar, they will fail to do that. They struggle to understand numerical values. They struggle with signs such as equal sign, minus, multiplication. They struggle with those. They struggle with the difference between addition and subtraction, for instance. So for this preparation, for this presentation, what we're doing to you, we are saying concentrate more on what manifests in your learners, in other words, in your phase that you registered for. But we are not saying you must disregard other phases. When we set the examinations at the end of the year, or whenever we set examinations, even though we do say that this specific question belongs to a specific phase, but there are certain things that can be found in all the phases, in both phases, foundation phase and intermediate and senior phase. So it always remains important for you as the student, when you study, you do not only concentrate on your phase, but we do encourage you to know more in your phase, because that is where, when you come out, you go to school teach, you are going to specialize in. How do we support our learners? Now, we know how these problems will manifest. We will be able to see, this child, this learner is struggling with mathematics. So we've got to come with ways to support the learner.